Please rewind this cassette.
All right, people, this is Pat with Box Office Addict on 101. Tonight we'll be going through our top 10 box office hits of this current weekend. So sit down with me for some smooth box office. Oh boy, this is getting to the point where it's the same movies every weekend, you know? This is always the issue with doing the show after a certain point, is that it just starts being the same movies because we're not in new release season. One movie's going to get released a week, maybe two, and none of them are going to have that big of an impact. I mean, all that's really new here is Call of the Wild. Call of the Wild, which I'm assuming is based off the famous novel, which I read many years ago. This isn't the first film adaptation of Call of the Wild. It is the most expensive, however. For some reason, instead of making this, I don't know, a $50 million movie with real animals and maybe some CGI, they decided to make this $135 million CGI animal movie, just like Doolittle. They just stuff it with CGI and go way over budget. I mean, this opening weekend of 24 million wouldn't seem that bad, honestly. If it wasn't for the budget being so high, the budget's so high that this opening weekend really isn't that great. This needed to open way higher with a budget of 135 million. I'm sorry my voice is a little off. I just woke up not too long ago. I'm drinking coffee. My voice isn't really clear yet. I'll try to get there though, guys, for you, because I love you and I care about you, and I want to go buy you a blow-up doll, a boyfriend pillow, and a mochaccino. All right. There's one thing I want to talk about, though. The Impractical Jokers movie. I love Impractical Jokers. I'm like a huge fan of the show. I think that it captures a lot of things that I loved about Kenny versus Spenny or the Tom Green show. I think these guys are extremely funny. You can go back and watch their sketch comedy stuff and things they did years ago. These guys have been around for a long time. They have YouTube videos from like the early days that are hilarious, and then I've seen them in other places. I know I saw Q on an episode of Howard Stern back in the 90s when Private Parts came out. But if you haven't watched Impractical Jokers, a lot of people say stuff that's on regular television just sucks. It's all dead, like don't watch network shows, don't watch reality shows, but there's always exceptions to these rules. And one of the exceptions is the True TV, which just became the Impractical Jokers network. They just gave these four guys a show where, you've seen this kind of premise before where it's candid camera, punked. But what they do is different. They don't play the joke on someone and have somebody sitting behind the monitor. They're playing jokes on each other. So basically, you'll send one guy out and he's mic'd up, and the three other guys in the back, and they're all childhood friends, tell the guy what to do. And whatever situation they keep putting him in makes it more awkward and tough for him. And if he doesn't do it, he loses the competition. And at the end, you have to do the thing they tell you to do. So they end up just making fun of each other, but they all have such a good sense of humor that they can deal with what each other says, and it puts them in these situations. So they're never really insulting the public. They're never really making fun of anyone. They're just giving each other shit. So it's got that sense of a group of friends going at each other. I had heard that this movie was coming out for a long time. I kept reading that there was an Impractical Jokers movie coming out, and I'm like, well, shit, that could be a huge hit. That could be like the Jackass movie, because this show is huge. Like, True TV's all day is this. It's been on for like 9 seasons. This is a really big show. So I figured this was going to be, a wide release. I thought they would release this in like 1,500 theaters and it could make some money, because I doubt they spent any money making it. But for some reason, it's only released in, and maybe it's because it doesn't have like an MTV behind it, it's only in 357 theaters. I wonder if it's playing in my area, because I would go see this movie. Straight up. $2.8 million. The story of humiliating high school mishap from '92 that sends the Impractical Jokers on the road competing in hidden camera challenges for the chance to turn back the clock and redeem 3 of the 4 Jokers. Yeah, I know. I remember hearing about this like 2 years ago. What was the screen average on this? 7,742. Not bad. I guess True TV never thought of this being that big of a thing. I guess in their minds it was like, hey, let's release it. We'll make a few $1,000,000. Then we can put it on television, or we can put it on a streaming service. Honestly, I feel like a couple years ago when this show was really popular, this could have done better. I'm really surprised by this. I figured this would have made more money. It's like that the Blue Collar Comedy Tour. I'm not a big fan of it, but like the DVD of that was like huge. There's some audience for this movie. Let's check out where Doolittle's at. Doolittle is at 200 million worldwide, still nowhere close to breaking even. Disaster, quite frankly. 87 million worldwide for The Gentleman from Guy Ritchie. That's honestly doing really well. And I'm happy for everyone involved. Maybe not Guy Ritchie so much. I don't really give a shit. I mean, I like Snatch and Lock and Stock as much as anyone, but Little Women is just at 200 million. I don't think any of these movies have updated, really. I think, like, Knives Out, yeah, 306 million. They're all at the same place, really. They maybe went up, like, 1,000,000, 500,000. Nothing really worth mentioning. The Photograph is at 17.6 million. Jumanji dropped 48%, but continues still to be a huge, huge hit. 311 mil domestic, 788 million. Will this reach 800 million? It's definitely possible. Seems like it will. Now, I believe the first one, well, the second one in the franchise, but I believe the last one did 962 million. So this is still, this is going to be like $150 million less than that movie, $160 million less. But, I mean, at this point, who cares? I mean, the budget is about the same as the first movie, and it's made over $800 million worldwide. And that domestic total of 311 million is fantastic. Because if you think, let's say they make the next film, which they're going to, and let's say they give it some more money, because I think at this point the cast and Jake Kasdan and them are going to be asking for a lot more money, but clearly, because this is a solidified franchise, and I think it's solidified with this cast, but they do need to bring in some new players. And Danny DeVito wasn't a bad idea, but maybe it's time to rotate in. It's funny, I was thinking about, this succeeded where something like Land of the Lost completely failed, the Will Ferrell movie, and how that was this huge bomb and one of his worst reviewed films. And it's a pretty bad movie, but I'm just thinking about that. Like, they did Land of the Lost, and everyone's like, why are you making that with Will Ferrell and Danny McBride? And it was kind of similar to this, actually, in a lot of ways. And that you actually can turn something like that into like a blockbuster franchise, like the action comedy with comedy actors. I mean, The Rock's an action star, but for the most part, it's a comedy ensemble. So maybe you could rotate in a Will Ferrell or a Ben Stiller, or an Owen Wilson could be fun as a bad guy. Maybe in the next movie bring in somebody that we haven't seen in a movie like this in a while. Just throwing that out there. Anyway, the next film, let's say they want more money. So let's say the next film costs like what, $140 million, 150. I don't see it not making 250 mil domestic at the minimum. And 700 million worldwide seems like a lock for this franchise, at least for one more movie. Now, after that, I don't know. After that, the franchise could take a huge drop, and we could be looking at, $500 million worldwide. But as of right now, like, shit, this is a solid franchise. It's like the Jurassic World franchise. Everybody was like, well, that was one and done. And then the next film made $1.3 billion. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I guess this is a thing. Parasite, $48 million, 209 million worldwide. You cannot stop Parasite, man. Parasite. You just cannot stop this fucking movie. I mean, it was impressive when this movie made $28 million domestically and was at like 130 million worldwide. That was impressive. If you go back and watch earlier box office addicts, I was like, wow, this is an amazing box office performance. Now it's at over 200 million, and it's going to make over 50 mil domestic. I mean, well, this movie overperformed in every way you possibly can. Like financially, critically, at the award seasons, it overperformed. I mean, this overperformed in every single way. I mean, kudos to Neon. Like, what a win! What a win for them! Like, to get this movie distributed like this, to capitalize on that boom of this movie, is really impressive. The fact that it's making so much money late into its release. I mean, this movie's been out for a long time, and the fact that it still has momentum, and just think about what it's going to be doing on streaming platforms. I think a lot of people are going to rent this movie, on Amazon, YouTube, what have you. So yeah, I mean, good for Parasite, man. That's crazy. 1917, 47% drop, and 152 mil domestic, 347 million worldwide. This is a very successful movie. $90 million budget, should make 160 mil domestic. I don't know if it'll make 400 million worldwide, but I did say, I believe early on, that I thought this film would make about 350 million plus. So yeah, that's what it's done. Very good release from Universal. Very, very smart release date. Good idea to lean on the critical acclaim, and it had so much momentum going to the Oscar season. I think that helped the box office. Although, I think people just like this movie. It's one of those movies that's a critical darling, and also, it plays well with mainstream audiences. Fantasy Island, 34 million worldwide on a $7 million budget. I'm just very confused by this whole release. Brahms the Boy 2? After a family moves into the Hillshire mansion, their young son soon makes friends with a lifelike dog called Brahms, or is it Brahms? Brahms or Brahms? I'm assuming it's Brahms. I don't know. $10 million budget, $8 million. The Boy 2. What the Alright, cool. Anyway, Bad Boys for Life, 49% drop, is at 191 mil domestic. It should be able to reach $200 million, just barely. And 400 million worldwide is a lock. But with the $90 million budget, I would say this is already a success. It's made a lot more actually than 1917 at the domestic box office. So, this isn't like a $550 million movie, but it didn't need to be. They kept the budget low. They were very smart to not make this like a $175 million movie, which I think it would have been a few years ago. Will Smith, one of his biggest issues is how indulgent some of his movie budgets are that he's involved with, and he's a reason for that too. He turns his movies into bigger films. Birds of Prey, holy shit. 60% drop, $6.8 million. That is bad. That is a really bad drop. This will not make 100 million. I don't know if it'll make 90. 72.8 million. 101 internationally, 173 million worldwide. This is not broke even. I think this has to make 250 million to be even like in an okay place. Wow, they did. I mean, you talk about Parasite overperforming. This underperformed in every way you could. Like, it just under 100 million at the domestic box office for a comic book film in the modern day. That's like unheard of. Like, think about how successful Venom was, or Shazam even did, like, 140 million domestically. And, because I say this now, a lot of times when, Kick-Ass didn't do well almost 10 years ago, and Scott Pilgrim, I guess it was about 10 years ago. I've often said I think if those movies came out in today's world, they would have done better. I especially think Kick-Ass. I think Kick-Ass just came out too soon. I think when Kick-Ass came out, people really weren't as into the R-rated comic book thing as they are now. I think, I just don't, I mean, and the movie wasn't a bomb, but it was a disappointment. A lot of people thought Kick-Ass was going to be this big hit. And I just think how much more successful Matthew Vaughn's been. I think if Kick-Ass had come out today, it could have made like 200, 50, $300 million. I just don't think the marketplace was there for it then. And even Scott Pilgrim, I think would have done better. Maybe not with Michael Cera today because he's kind of he's not really anybody anymore. But the movie Scott Pilgrim itself, I think, could have done a lot better today. I just think they were like a little bit before their time. You know, that was before geekdom really took over. I mean, that was still in the early days of the MCU. Like that was like during Iron Man 2. You know, I don't think anybody knew how really, really big comic book movies were going to get across all platforms. Whereas, yeah, wow, I don't really know what happened here. I mean, the only thing I can go with is, besides the bad marketing, is Harley Quinn just isn't as popular as people think, or non-sexualized Harley Quinn's not as popular. And that's all I could think. And a lack of movie stars in this outside of Margot. Like, I love Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Ewan McGregor's in this, right? But, you know, they really weren't pushed in the marketing. I mean, Mary Elizabeth Winstead doesn't even look like herself in the trailers for this movie. I guess just a bad project. I can't really blame Warner Brothers. I would have never thought, like, if I was producing this movie, I would have thought it would have made money. I would have thought it would have at least made, like, you know, $300 million worldwide. I wouldn't have thought it would do much better than that, but it's like, okay, well, we can break even on this. But this is a disaster. Okay, so Call of the Wild, starring Harrison Ford, who I bet was really high. A sled dog struggles for survival in the wilds, the Yukon. $24.7 million, $135 million budget. That's without marketing, people. That's without motherfucking marketing. $42 million worldwide. I mean, hey, you know what? This isn't a bad opening weekend, all things considered, but that budget, I mean, even if this somehow did make $100 million domestic, like if this had the greatest week-to-week holds that we've seen in a while, which is possible. We've seen movies open lower than this and make that kind of money. It would still have a long ways to go, because it would still have to make like $150 million internationally. I don't know what they were thinking with that budget, man. Yeah, at 20th Century Fox. So this was a project that Disney must have inherited from Fox. Yeah, wow, what a bad... You know, it's not even a badly reviewed film, and I'm sure it plays well for kids, but yeah, this is a movie... I would have never let the budget of this movie go above $50 million, and I certainly wouldn't have made it all CGI. I've seen movies like this before where they use real sled dogs, and they look fine. There's this one with Willem Dafoe that came out like 3 years ago called like Tofo, or something like that. I can't remember the name of it, but I watched it in my apartment one night on Disney Plus, and it was like it was really good, really well acted, well directed. They had good music. The sled dogs scenes were fantastic. So I don't know why you just didn't have Harrison Ford with real animals. I've seen that. If it was hard to do, I'd get it, but I've seen it done in a dozen movies. I've seen this all before, so that just seems odd to me. It seemed like that's one of those things where Hollywood's just being indulgent for the sake of it. But yeah, I mean, that's so stupid. You could have made this movie for such a low budget, and I think it would have opened exactly the same. If this movie had cost $50 million, we'd be talking about like, hey, this is a really good opening weekend. This is a big success. But instead, all of the numbers just get overshadowed by that budget. Speaking of CGI animals, we have number one here, Sonic the skunk. Imagine if he was a skunk. 54% drop. So maybe the word of mouth wasn't as high positive on Sonic as maybe we thought. I thought it would play well with kids. And it seemed like generally people were loving this goddamn movie. I mean, that just seemed like across the board, everyone was like, oh my god, Sonic's amazing. I get emotional when he's in Robotnik's glasses at the end. And I don't know why it's Jay Leno sounding everything. Yeah, I saw that Sonic movie. It's pretty good. $85 million budget, 107 mil domestic. It looks like 150 million is possible. Maybe 160. I don't think this will reach 200 million. And I think 350 million worldwide is certainly possible. Maybe 400 million worldwide. So this is successful, but it seemed like after the opening weekend and just the reception, I thought, wow, this movie has a real shot at like 200 mil domestic and 500 million worldwide. Um, like it really felt like it was going to be this big hit, and it just seemed like audiences were loving it. I mean, I was watching clips on YouTube, and everybody in the comments, it was just had that positive, Jim Carrey dancing to that Evil Grows song, and the whole thing, the whole Sonic, all the chase sequences, the slow motion. It seemed like people were really responding to it. But I guess not. I guess it's more somewhere in the middle, which makes sense. So, I would say, yeah, 155, 160 mil domestic, 300 million worldwide. But it's not a bomb by any means. They should make a profit on this, and they'll probably greenlight Sonic 2. But I guess the way you have to look at it is this film could have been a fucking disaster. It could have been like a huge bomb. And the fact that it's doing okay is really good because they actually corrected a major mistake. So I guess you have to look at it that way, the way they improved their box office instead of being like, oh, it's not going to make $600 million. Like, well, I guess, they're lucky it's making what it is. Rise of the Skywalker continues to be the fall of the Star Wars franchise. 1,072,000,000 worldwide. I mean, this is really bad. I mean, when you think that Joker did these kind of numbers with such a smaller budget, and just this is the first Star Wars film in the new releases of this trilogy that's not the highest grossing film of the year, which Last Jedi and Force Awakens were. This is not even the second highest grossing film of the year, and I'm pretty sure this is not even the third highest grossing film of the year, and I don't even think it's the fourth highest grossing film of the year. And just the budget. I mean, the budget for this movie is like $280 million. I mean, honestly, I don't think that domestic total's really that bad. Like, looking at it, 514 mil domestic is huge. Like, I mean, that's actually a lot of money. I mean, in today's world, a lot of movies make over 500 mil domestic. Like, the Lion King remake did that, and it happens more now than it used to. It used to be like $500 million was like unheard of. I remember when The Dark Knight made 533 mil domestic, everybody was like, how's that possible? And we see it more often now, but it's really not that bad. It's the international numbers that really let this movie down, because with The Force Awakens, they made $1 billion internationally off that movie, and domestically it made 936 million. And then The Last Jedi, the international box office was like 700 million, and Rogue One did really well internationally. This was a huge dip with the international numbers, though. Like, the 514 mil domestic's disappointing, but it's like, okay, it dropped off a bit domestically. What they really needed, and Jurassic World 2 had this, The Fallen Kingdom, was like, okay, yeah, but it can bring in $800 million internationally, or like $700 million internationally. And that would have put it at like 1.2, 1.3 billion worldwide, and it would have been closer, around the same numbers as The Last Jedi. Let's say if this would have made 1.2 billion. Now, that still would have been a disappointment, but then the studio could say, like, hey, we made a movie that made $1.2 billion. I mean, shit, we can't complain. It did really well internationally. Come on, it made like $700-800 million. We still have a lot of gas in this tank. But the fact that the international numbers dropped down to below 600 million, I think is even more of a bad sign. Because they can't lean on that. They really, that's what puts you over the top in today's world, is the international numbers. And they get no boost from China because people in China don't give a fuck about Star Wars. So there you go with like just under 1.1 billion, which makes it just look a lot worse than if it was like 1.3. Because, when Last Jedi made 1.3 and a lot of us were like, this is a big drop from Force Awakens. People were like, yeah, but it's still the highest grossing film of the year. All right, and it made 600 mil domestic. Are you going to tell me 1.3 billion's a bomb? And I was like, all right, I guess you kind of have a little bit of a point. Like, it still made a lot of money. It just seems like quite the decline. And then people are like, yeah, it's the middle film. I remember seeing that everywhere. That was the funniest fucking thing. I love how wrong the Star Wars people have been every fucking movie out. I remember in 2015 it was all, they'll explain all of the issues with the story and the First Order and Rey in the next movie and Snoke, and then they didn't, or it was terrible. Then everyone was like, okay, you guys all hate that movie, but you don't see the full picture yet. It's going to keep evolving. And then when I was like, yeah, it seems like the box office is declining, they're like, no, that's just because it's a middle film. Empire Strikes Back made less money than Return of the Jedi domestically. And then Attack of the Clones was the lowest grossing film of the prequels. It's like, and then the next film's going to come out, be like Revenge of the Sith, and, you know, be the biggest one or make like 1.5 billion. Well, that didn't happen. So I'm sick of you guys saying this shit. This just proves a bias towards Star Wars. As this is what keeps happening. I've just seen it and I've been dealing with it for 5 goddamn years. It's like, no, the next movie will fix this because of this pattern. This ain't the same fucking pattern, man. This is Disney Star Wars. This ain't the same shit. And then when Solo bombed, it's like, I don't know, it seems like people are less interested in Star Wars. Yeah, but that was just because nobody wanted a Han Solo movie. Wait for the next one. It's going to be huge. You're going to be blown away how successful Rise of the Skywalker is. Well, here we are, people. And it's not making as much as Rogue One at the domestic box. Rogue One did better than this movie. Rogue fucking One. So I don't get these people. They just get so like clouded by Star Wars. They're like, no, the next one will do well. No, this is the lowest grossing film of the new trilogy. By far, actually. It's quite a steep decline, movie to movie. I mean, Last Jedi was like $700 million less than Force Awakens, but this is still like, what, 250 million overall? So I'm just getting so frustrated with these people. They were like, oh, those plot holes will be explained and the movie will keep doing well. Then here we are, and it's like, are you embarrassed? Can you guys finally be embarrassed? You know, there was a quote that a YouTuber said that I agreed with about the Zack Snyder cut, was that Snyder fans pretend to be DC fans, which is very true. It's a great point. Because all of those Snyder fans on Twitter that talk about how complex and grand and beautiful, and they always focus on the cinematography and action scenes and Marvel being overrated. Someone like, what's his name, like Film Glob or whatever, and they always just shit on Marvel and praise DC and talk about, they just ignore the critical reception, they ignore the financial disasters of those movies, and they won't listen to anybody movie to movie. It's like, yeah, I don't know if this is going to work out. People aren't really responding to these movies. And then they're like, well, no, they released the extended cut of Batman v Superman and people loved it. It's like, that's actually not true. You're just making that up. You read that on the internet somewhere. Like, that's not true. People didn't all change their minds on Batman v Superman. So a lot of it is Snyder fans, like people who like Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, pretending that it's just because this is the ultimate comic book adaptations of the DC universe, and Marvel's just too cowardly to do that, even though a lot of stuff in the MCU is much more loyal to the comic books than stuff that is in the DC universe. And I'm a DC guy over a Marvel guy when it comes to comic books, but I don't know anyone could say that. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, the characters are much more closer to their comic book counterparts than some of the DC. In particular, like Superman is really far away from his comic book counterpart in a lot of the movies. But then when Justice League comes out and does so horrible, instead of all being like, yeah, we were wrong, you know, we fucked up, they're like, no, it's just because they didn't release the Zack Snyder cut. As if they would have released a 3-hour Zack Snyder Justice League and it would have done well. I hate to tell you this, it would have got the bad reviews. Maybe not as bad. It might have got like 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. And it would have bombed. It wouldn't have made $1 billion. It wouldn't have made $900 million. So there was no scenario where the Zack Snyder Justice League movie was going to be successful, unless you redid the entire thing from the beginning. But they live in this illusion that, no, it was just Warner Brothers. People would have went and saw this movie if it wasn't for the rumors of the reshoots and all that. It's like, no. It was already dead. Batman v Superman already killed the interest in this. Like, quit. You have to separate those two things. You know, it's just, it's fucking annoying. There's a lot of movies and franchises that I've loved that did not do well. and I just had to accept that, it wasn't working for whatever reason. And you can still like it personally, but you try to start making these arguments and you make yourself sound like an idiot. Like, the Spike Jonze film, Her, I think is like the best film of the decade. And I loved it. And it was critically acclaimed and it won an Oscar. And people seemed to generally like it, but it didn't do well financially. It didn't open very well. The word of mouth wasn't very good. And I just think, yeah, most people probably don't respond to this movie. They probably think it's weird. It's too cerebral. They don't like this kind of science fiction story. It didn't connect with mainstream audiences. It's not a movie that's going to make $100 million, and that doesn't bother me. It's just like, hey, man, he made his little movie here, and it connects with a certain group of people, but it wasn't necessarily a great project to make money or to be an iconic movie. It just, it was successful enough for the studio because it got Oscar nominations, so they get to have that with their studio, and there's stuff like that, and I think it really helped Joaquin Phoenix on his comeback with The Master, which also didn't do well. The Master was a big bomb. All of Paul Thomas Anderson's recent films haven't been doing well. And you just go with it. You're like, okay, yeah, I get why people wouldn't like The Master. I really do. I get why people wouldn't be that into Inherent Vice or The Phantom Thread. I totally get why those wouldn't respond to people. So you just have to accept that at some point. The difference is we're talking about movies that cost $20 million, compared to these movies that are costing $200 to $300 million. So that's the issue here. Maybe Zack Snyder, and I think this would be great for him, should be making lower budget films. The best movie he ever made was Dawn of the Dead, and wasn't that movie didn't that cost like 20 something million dollars? I think if Zack Snyder made lower budgeted films with less CGI and some decent screenplays, I actually think he could be a half decent filmmaker, like an action director. He could make something like Tony Scott-esque, Like if he got a script like True Romance, and he made a movie like that for like $25 million, like Tony Scott, you know what I mean? Like if he got a crime screenplay that had style to it, I think he could make a pretty fun movie. Dawn of the Dead's a really fun, well-acted movie. I think 300 was so successful, he's been chasing that ever since, and he's never been able to capture it again. And the same thing with these new Star Wars movies. It's like, guys, scale it down. Clearly, you're not getting that global audience. That's one thing about The Mandalorian. They scaled it down, and Baby Yoda's the most famous thing so far in this new Star Wars trilogy. And it's a puppet, It just shows you that it's sometimes the little things are what turn into big things, where you can make a lot of money. Think about the money Disney's going to make off Baby Yoda, instead of trying to make movies that make $2 billion, which is actually a lot harder when you think about it. It's like, fuck, that's really hard. It's not hard to come up with some marketing gimmick that could sell a lot of merchandise and people fall in love with it and then just watch the thing. They're like, what's going to happen to Baby Yoda next season? Joker. Also, Joker proves this. They make a movie for $55 million. They build it around one iconic character. They have a really distinct style and premise. It makes almost $1.1 billion. This just exactly what I'm talking about. Zack Snyder should have been doing this kind of stuff from the beginning. He should have made a lower budgeted Superman film, not a $225 million film with an hour-long action scene at the end of it. That first part of Man of Steel, where it is more like an indie film, where it's Superman traveling around, just working odd jobs. He's got the beard and he's trying to find purpose in life. That's your movie, man. Right there. Just this handheld camera work, Clark Kent the man traveling around the world. That's your movie. As soon as he gets to the Fortress of Solitude, that whole movie starts falling the fuck apart. As soon as Zod comes in, really, just make that movie about Clark Kent trying to find himself. You could have made that movie for, like $100 million. Have very little Superman stuff in it, and then near the end, maybe, he gets some Superman he starts saving people. And he starts getting recognized as Superman, and then he's like, all right, I guess I need to go somewhere, and then he decides to move to Metropolis. A real origin story. Save Zod for the second movie. Save all that stuff for the second movie, because that was the problem with Man of Steel, was that it ends with this huge action finale that feels like it should be the ending of the third movie in a trilogy. It was very Michael Bay Transformers, like you go too big too early, and then how do you top that? Where if it had been a little small, like the first Thor movie, which I hate the Dutch tilt, by the way, but it's a very small movie. Most of it's Thor hanging out in this small town. And then even the final fight at the end's not that big of a scale. And people responded to it, but that leads you to a Thor Ragnarok. I would have preferred the lower budgeted Superman movie. I think that would have been ingenious. And then the movie still could have made 600, 750 million dollars worldwide. It could have made something like that. And because they didn't spend a bunch of money on it, would have been profitable. And then let somebody do a Batman movie like that. And then let Zack Snyder do Man of Steel 2. And like, okay, this one's going to cost like 150 mil. We got to have more action in it. We got to have more Superman. Maybe even 180 million, right? But not 250 million. And this one, he's Superman now. So it's about him and Lois. This is the classic Superman story, And then you bring in like Batman and Superman meeting each other. Then that's your big $250 million movie. And then, it's just about them meeting each other and either working together or fighting. Cut all that other shit out. Just make it about the relationship between Batman and Superman. And you got $1 billion movie, that's where they fucked up. The only one that's like got a huge scale from beginning to end and shockingly did really well was Aquaman. The fact that Aquaman made like 1.1 billion and was this big Lord of the Rings-esque movie. But that's just James Wan, man. He just has something. He gets audiences in a way that Zack Snyder can't. Zack Snyder is not James Wan. James Wan is a special case. And same thing with Star Wars. It's like, would it be that crazy to make a Star Wars movie that costs like just $100 million and doesn't have all the Force, shit in it? As a smaller scale movie? I don't know. I think it could do really well if it had a cool, lead character and a cool idea about what it really was, But who knows? Maybe I'm talking out of my ass, but I think people miss that sometimes. I really do. I'm not saying don't make a blockbuster. It could still be a blockbuster. But a blockbuster doesn't just mean spectacle and CGI and action scenes. A blockbuster means a crowd-pleasing, entertaining movie. The Hangover was a blockbuster, right? It just means a movie that audiences respond to and go to. That's what a blockbuster really is, In a sense, Knives Out is playing like a blockbuster, for sure. Movies like The Social Network or Black Swan were blockbusters. And you can still make a movie like that. I don't know when the studio system got in their heads that it was impossible to make those movies. They got obsessed with movies making $1 billion. Where like look at 1917, $90 million budget makes $350 million. Something like Get Out, made for $4 million, makes, and then Us, $20 million makes $250 million worldwide. And Bad Boys for Life only costing $90 million. There's there's movies out there. If you have a bunch of these movies making money, your studio's doing well. Like, yeah, you're not going to be making the like $2 billion grossers. And there's always stuff like Frozen 2, which makes, almost $1.5 billion. I get that. But you just got to mix those movies in with these other movies. And then you don't have these huge disasters. You don't have these bombs. What about Jojo Rabbit? $85 million. Yeah, even something like Jojo Rabbit just making $85 million. That's not bad. And you win an Oscar, and Taika Waititi, it's like Ford v Ferrari did okay. There's a market out there for different movies, man. And I think that's just where either going to be the collapse of the fall, because people are either going to commit completely to streaming, or studios are going to release more stuff like Parasite, and stuff like 1917, and that's going to keep the studios afloat. Because otherwise, yeah, it's just going to be Disney taking over because they have all the IPs. Like Sony could milk Spider-Man and Jumanji all they want, but that's only going to last so long. And with Birds of Prey, we already see that Warner Brothers, as successful as Joker was, they could still have a pretty bad release. And then, yeah, Call of the Wild, $135 million. That's a prime example of way too much money spent on a movie. I mean, it costs more than Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, that's insane. All right, I'll see you guys for episode 102. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for indulging me on my thoughts and rants. I'm gonna finish my cup of coffee that I've been drinking for what seems like an hour and get ready to go to work here soon. But love you guys.